Once upon a time, there lived a man who dumped his fiancée of 6 years, all because she had cows. His name was Easy, and for the past 6 years, he was in a relationship with a woman who only saw her period once a year. Her name was Chio, and they met during her first day in university when she risked her own life to save his. Chucky ran into a burning building to drag him out of the fire when she heard a cry for help coming from inside the burning house. Izzy was in the bathroom when the gas in his house exploded. The bathroom door refused to open as he stood there screaming at the top of his voice. Students had gathered outside, shouting and panicking, but nobody dared to enter. The heat was too intense as everyone stepped back in complete fear. Chioki, however, heard his cries and rushed in to go save him. She didn't know who he was, but her heart could not allow her stay still while someone was in distress. So she wrapped a scarf around her nose and ran straight into the building before anyone could stop her inside. She followed the sound and arrived at the bathroom door, which had some debris blocking the door from opening. Choke pushed them aside as she forced the door open. Inside she saw Izzy, who had already lost hope. She helped him up as they both escalated their way out of the burning house. Izzy could not believe that he was alive. For a moment, his life flashed before his eyes as he thought of his dear mother, who he knew would not survive if anything happens to her only child. Izzy was so grateful to Choke for saving him. In fact, what touched him more was the fact that she suffered some burns on her back, just to save his life. They went to the hospital together as the doctors attended to their injuries. Once they were done, Shio realized that Izzy had nowhere else to go. So, she offered him a room in the house, and could not understand how a woman will be so kind to a complete stranger. He stayed in her house for months, and that was how their relationship began. Izzy promised to always be there for her. She never treated him like a burden, and Aya could not imagine a life without her. However, one morning, Choke revealed to him that she hadn't seen her period for months. In fact, since the fire, her period had not come, and Choke could not help but worry. They decided to visit the hospital together, and the doctor revealed to them that the fire incident could have triggered a level of stress in her body that had worsened her PCOS symptoms. He revealed that her hormones had become severely imbalanced, which explained why her cycle had still not come. The doctor explained that PCOS did not mean that she could never have children, only that it might require patience, care, and sometimes medical support. Chi and Izzy held hands tightly that day, believing that love meant walking through uncertainty together. Izzy nodded as if he understood, promising her that nothing would ever come between them. And for a very long time, he kept that promise. He stood beside her during hospital visits, encouraged her when she felt discouraged, and assured her that marriage was not only about children. Choke began to see her period once in a year as she hung on to hope that one day everything will regularize. However, this did not happen as her cycle remained irregular for over 6 years. Despite this, everyone believed that they would end up together. The court is lucky to have a kind and compassionate woman like Chi, who risked her life to save his. Even his friends called her his guardian angels, as they all wished to have a woman like her in their lives. However, as the years went by, A began to reconsider his position. His old mother visited him one day and met Shuki, who she told to leave her son alone. "Don't you know that he's my only son? Why do you want to force your barness on him?" she asked Chi, whose heart broke to hear such words from his mother. She stood there sad as A's mother informed her that her son would never marry a desolate woman. She warned her to stay away, and Chi left his house immediately as her heart broke into a million pieces. She called Izzy and narrated all that his mother did to her, and Izzy apologized on his mother's behalf. He returned home hours later and met his mother, who reminded him that he was an only child. "You can't possibly want to marry a woman who is no different from your fellow man," she said, to who she told that she needed grandchildren. "I don't want to die without seeing my grandchildren," she said, to who tried to convince her that Chio's condition was treatable, but his mother was not willing to listen. Izzy could not withstand the pressure any longer. He began to think deeply about his decision to marry Choki, who he knew would struggle to have children. He even went ahead to pay a visit to their doctor, who informed him that her condition would require patience and consistent care, and that there were many treatment options available if they chose to walk the journey together. But instead of hearing hope, all could hear was delay. The words of his mother echoed louder in his ears as he left the hospital that day, determined to end his current relationship with her. So Easy began to look at Choke not as the woman who saved his life, but as a risk he might regret in the future. He began to pull away gently, hoping that Chio would leave him after a while. But this did not happen as Choke made excuses for him, not knowing that I had checked out of their 6-year relationship. He discussed it with his friends, hoping to get some advice on how to end his relationship with her without causing her much hurt. But his friends advised him otherwise. AZ reminded them that he was the only child of his mother and that he needed children to continue his lineage. You guys expect me to marry a bar woman even when you know how important it is to have children. His friends looked at him disappointed as they rebuked him for calling her barren. This woman you are calling barren is in this condition because of you. She went into the fire to save you, and this resulted in her current predicament, which you are now using to mock her. What makes you so sure that she won't have children if you end up with her? They asked Izzy, who informed them that he was not willing to take the risk. I rather marry another woman who I am sure would have a child for me instead of waiting for a miracle that might never come, he said stubbornly as he rose up from his seat and walked away. His friends watched him leave, knowing that sometimes a man becomes deaf when fear and pride begins to speak louder than loyalty. Days later, Izzy Satoki down in their living room. She smiled softly, thinking that he wanted to propose to her. However, the look on his face in that moment told a completely different story. Izzy cleared his truth as he began to speak. I've been thinking a lot about the future. He began slowly as Chucky listened patiently, unaware that everyone that followed would tear her one piece at a time. He told her that he needed children, that he could not continue in a relationship filled with uncertainty. Then came the words that caught the deepest. I cannot marry a woman who may never give me children. The room fell silent as Chuck felt as though the same fire that she once ran into had returned to burn her heart. She reminded him of the doctor's words that Coase did not mean that she could not conceive. But Isa shook his head coldly. In 6 years, you have never even given me one pregnancy. Not even one mistake, he added, his voice heavy with judgment as Choke's eyes filled with tears. Her heart shattered in a way that she could not explain, but she did everything possible to remain calm. She looked him in the eyes and asked him a question that cut deeper than a knife. After everything, is this how you see me? She asked, who looked at her for a short moment as he walked out of her house, not carrying the damage that he had done. Chio cried her eyes out. For days, she remained indoors as everything that happened replayed in her mind over and over again. Choke could not believe that the man who promised to never leave her side had left her in the most inhumane way. She tried calling him to see if everything was a joke, but Aza blocked her numbers as he began to see another woman that she knew. In fact, his new woman had hung out with them in the past when he introduced her to Chio as his work colleague. She had heard about their relationship, but didn't confirm it until one afternoon when she saw them sitting across from each other at the famous restaurant. Chio froze as she saw them laughing and holding hands. She stood there quietly, her chest tightening as tears began to pour down her eyes. Before anyone could see her, she turned around and walked away, ensuring that no one saw her tears. That day, something inside her finally broke. Not just her heart, but the illusion that she had held on to for years. Months passed, and news began to spread quickly that AZ had married his colleague, Celine. People praised his decision, saying that he finally chose the right woman. They said that her mother had 5 children, and that she came from an extremely fertile home. His mother danced proudly at the wedding, believing that grandchildren will soon fill her house with laughter. However, Chio watched from a distance, heartbroken as she decided to move on with her life. She focused on healing, on rebuilding her confidence, and on reminding herself that her worth was not tied to her body. During this time, someone unexpected stood quietly beside her. Chinidu, one of Ace's close friends, who had always respected and admired her strength. He never rushed her to move on or pressured her to forget the past. Instead, he listened when she needed to talk and gave her space when she needed silence. And slowly their friendship began to grow into something much deeper. In fact, something calmer than the love that she had once known. Finally asked her to be his wife, and Chucky agreed with all of her heart. is ahead of their engagement and decided to confront his friend. Guy, get sense. How will you marry a bearing woman? Of all the women in this world, it is the one who sees her period once in a year that you decided to marry, he said to Chinidu, who warned him never to refer to his fiancée as Barry. If you ever spew this kind of rubbish about my woman again, I will teach you a lesson that you will never forget, he said to who laughed and revealed to him that he was making the worst mistake of his life. Chinidu walked out on him as he made up his mind not to allow come between their happiness. They got married weeks later, and to everyone's surprise, Chi got pregnant almost immediately. There was no struggle to conceive, and the people could not believe that she even got pregnant before Ai's wife, that everyone believed was fatal. Izzy was so to hear this. He called his wife into the room, asking why she hadn't conceived in 1 year. Just take a look at Chi, the woman I thought was buried. She's pregnant only few weeks after her wedding. We have been married for over 1 year, yet you have refused to take, and not even for once. Hope you haven't damaged your womb with numerous abortions. He asked his wife Celine, who warned him never to speak to her in that way again. You think I am Chi that will take all your rubbish? Don't you ever speak to me like that in your life, or else I will show you why I have been single for all these years, she said to gave her a very hot slap across her face. Before he knew what was happening, Celine slapped him back as she pushed him to the floor and began to beat him blue and black. Izzy ran away from the house terrified. He could not believe how strong his wife was as he called up her brother to lay his complaint. It was then that her brother revealed to him that Celine was a black belter. For all these months, AE believed that his wife was scam. But what he did not know was that Celine was not a pushover. In fact, she was a fighter who beat up several men in the past. That was why she was still single at this time. But AZ had no idea and decided to marry her. And from that day forward, Beast disappeared completely from his home. Celine stopped pretending to be the quiet wife that he thought he married. She spoke to him without fear, challenged every insult, and refused to carry the shame that he tried to place on her shoulders. AZ watched helplessly as the marriage he rushed into slowly turned into a battlefield. The same confidence he once used to judge Yoki began to fade, replaced by regrets that grew heavier as each day passed. Months went by without pregnancy, and as frustration began to increase, every time he heard news about Chio's growing bed, his heart tightened with jealousy as he stood there in silent regret. Instead of looking inward, he blamed Celine's past, accusing her of hiding secrets. His words became sharper, and the house filled with tension that refused to leave. Celine, however, did not cry or beg like Chucky once did. She answered him with the same fire that he gave to her, making him realize too late that he had married a woman who would never tolerate his disrespect. Unable to handle the pressure alone, he complained to his mother. He told her that Celine was stubborn and that she had refused to give him a child. His mother wasted no time as she traveled from the village to confront her new daughter-in-law. She entered the house with authority, speaking loudly about her quest for grandchildren. She called on Celine, asking why she hadn't taken in over 1 year. Mama gave Celine lectures on how she conceived 3 months into her marriage. If not that my husband died shortly after I gave birth to him, I would have had several other children. So, what is your excuse for not conceiving until now? She asked Celine, who picked up a pestle stick from the kitchen and chased her out of the compound. If you want a baby so badly, go and give birth yourself. Celine shouted angrily. Oh, you think I'm choky? That both of you walked on and got away with it. The neighbors all watched in shock as A's mother ran out of the house, vowing never to step into her son's home again. That day marked the beginning of A's deepest regret. He realized that the gentle woman who he once abandoned would never have allowed such to come into his life. Years passed and Easy waited desperately for a child that never came. Meanwhile, Shock gave birth to her first son and conceived again shortly afterwards. Her home filled with laughter as Chinidu treated her with the kind of patient that I once promised, but failed to keep. Every time Ise heard about her happiness, a silent pain grew inside of him, reminding him of the life that he had thrown away, all because of fear. One evening at a mutual friend's party, as he saw Shoki's first son for the very first time, the boy laughed freely, his eyes bright with innocence as he played with other children at the party. Izzy stared at him for a long moment before announcing loudly that the child looked exactly like him. "This boy is mine," he declared, accusing Chio of getting pregnant before she married Chinedu. The atmosphere changed immediately as whispers began to fill the entire room. People began to argue as some saw the resemblance, whilst others looked at Isa with disbelief, wondering how a man who once rejected a woman because of her condition could now claim her child as his. Choke stood there frozen for a moment, her son clutched tightly against her chest as anger rose inside her like fire. She did not scream or argue. Instead, she turned to her husband quietly and said, "Let's go. Let's go out of here." Chinu nodded, his jaw tight with anger as they walked out of the party and returned home. That night, Chi cried silently in the car, not out of weakness, but out of exhaustion from a past that she thought she had finally escaped. The next morning, a loud knock echoed through their gate. Chinidu opened the door to see Az standing there, his face stubborn and restless. Without greeting anyone, he walked straight into the sitting room and began to accuse them. "You know the boy is mine," he said repeatedly, pointing towards the child who played quietly on the floor. Chioke's eyes burned with anger, but she remained calm as she allowed her husband to speak with him. Chinidu stepped forward, his voice low firm. "Watch your mouth, Easy. Don't come into my house to insult my wife." But Easy refused to back down. He looked directly at Chinedu and asked why he was scared. "Why are you scared? If you are sure he's your son, why are you afraid of a simple DNA test?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Chucky felt her heart pound as memories of the past rushed back, but she refused to let Ise shake her peace again. Chinidu turned to her gently, asking what she wanted to do. So she took a deep breath and agreed for the test to be consulted. "The truth can never hide," she said as he looked her in the eyes and scoffed. He crossed his arms with confidence as he began to speak. "If the child turns out to be yours, I will leave and never disturb you both again. But if he is mine, I will take him because I can never allow another man raise my own son." His words filled the room with tension as Choki and her husband watched him leave with his shoulders raised high. Days later, the test was conducted, and when the results came out, the doctor revealed the truth that ended up changing everything. The child was not Izzy's child. However, the test revealed that Izzy suffered from a rare genetic abnormality that made it impossible for him to father children naturally. The room fell silent as his pride collapsed in front of everyone. For the first time in his life, he understood that the woman who he once labored as barren had never been the problem to start with. He was the one who was sterile, but his ego blinded him to that revelation as he decided to blame everyone but himself. He stepped out into the hospital corridor, his legs shaking as though the ground beneath him had shifted. People walked past him, laughing and talking, unaware that his world had just fallen apart. He sat on a metal bench and covered his face with both hands. "I blamed her," he whispered to himself as memories came flashing back like a movie. Izzy for the first time in his life cried openly, not because he could not have children, but because he finally understood the kind of woman that he had lost. He returned home broken, carrying a shame that he could no longer hide. But instead of comfort, he met an even harsher reality. Celine had already heard the news. She packed her bags without hesitation, her voice cold as she spoke. "You accused me of abortions, insulted me, and dragged me into your insecurity. I cannot stay with a man who does not know himself." Without waiting for his response, she walked out of the house, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than loneliness. Days turned into weeks, and Asa began to understand the weight of his choices. He remembered Chio running into the fire to save him, her gentle voice during the hospital visit, and the way she believed in him even when others doubted him. He realized that she would have stood beside him through this truth, not as judgment, but as support. One afternoon, he saw Chi again from a distance, surrounded by her children as she laughed at her husband Chinu. She looked peaceful, not because life was perfect, but because she chose a man who valued her beyond what her body could do or not. Ae stood there quietly, realizing that sometimes the greatest loss in life is not what we never had, but what we failed to protect when it was still within our reach. And so the story became a lesson whispered among those who had it. A man who judged love through fear lost the very person who would have loved him through truth. A woman once called barren became a mother of joy, and in the end has learned the hardest lesson of all, that destiny does not punish people for their condition. Sometimes the greatest mistake is not losing someone, but failing to recognize their worth even when they stood beside you through the fire. His mother regretted all that she did to Chio, who turned out to be the complete opposite of who they believed she was. The lesson to be learned from this story is that love should never be measured by fear, pressure, or the ability to give birth. Many people rush to judge others without first looking at themselves, forgetting that life has a way of revealing hidden truths in its own time. No one should be called barren or worthless because of a medical condition, and no relationship built on pride and selfish expectations can ever bring lasting peace. Is a lens to it that kindness, loyalty, and genuine love are far more valuable than assumptions about fertility. This story reminds us to treat people with compassion, to stand by those who stood by us during our darkest moments, and to remember that sometimes the person we push away is a very blessing meant to walk beside us through every storm. I hope